We're back. Another awesome episode of This Life Ain't For Everybody coming your way. Today's episode, again, is brought to you by our friends out of Lynchburg, Tennessee, the iconic Jack Daniels. Enjoy it responsibly. Never allow underage drinking. We take Jack with us wherever we go. Duck camp, America's highways, byways, back roads, chasing ducks, chasing geese, chasing stories, chasing memories. Jack's always there for us, and they believe in our culture. They support conservation, and they're all about habitat, the animals, and we truly are humbled to be part of the Jack Daniels family out of the iconic area of Lynchburg, Tennessee. I'm joined today by somebody that might know a little bit about Jack Daniels. The newest member, and this is a short list, and he is going to educate us on that list today, but this is the new Master Distiller since October 2020, Mr. Chris Fletcher. Welcome, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Is it kind of a surreal feeling to know that people, guys and girls that are of age listening to this podcast are going to see your signature on Jack Daniels bottles when they buy them at retail from now on?
It is, I tell you. That's probably one of the most bizarre things about the whole deal is seeing your name out there. It's Jack has made a lot of friends all over the world. There's no doubt about it, and continues to make friends every day. And it's just such an amazing brand, amazing company to work for. And there's so many great people here, and to have your name associated with it it's very humbling.
But it's one thing to have your name associated with it, but this is like literally a signature on the bottle where they took your signature and they got it, to where they can duplicate it and print it all on all of the labels.
Right.
It's actually going to have Master Distiller Chris Fletcher with your signature on there, kind of like this brand where if you read up on the history of the brand, and we're going to have you educate us some on that today, but over the last 7 or 8 years, I've tried to educate myself on it as much as I can. It is an iconic brand. You have been entrusted in a way to fly that flag and to carry this brand forward into the future, meaning that when your name goes on those bottles as the Master Distiller, you're putting pretty much your stamp of approval. And Jack Daniels and all of the people, the trailblazers that came before you, are saying, if Chris puts his name on it, then it's accepted by us. And that's got to be an amazing feeling.
It is. It really is. I mean, I couldn't be prouder to be in my role. And, this place, this distillery, I grew up literally 3 miles right down the street here. You could walk to my parents' house from here. Heck, you could walk to my house from here right now. So, I grew up around this distillery. I grew up here in Lynchburg. My grandfather was our master distiller here for many years as well. I come to work every day in his office, his old office that he had, and sit at his old desk every single day. And, there's a lot of pride in that, and there's, I have to say though, I get a lot of the credit as the master distiller, but there's a great team of people here and a great team of people that have had family members before them. And I would be the first to tell you that it's certainly on everyone's mind here at Jack Daniels that, we're carrying the flag for a few years, for our 20, 30, however many years we're lucky enough to be here. And we're going to be passing it down to that next generation too. And so when you think about master distiller, director of quality, all of my roles here, the hats that I wear at the distillery, when you think about that and what it means to the families of Lynchburg, that's the ultimate quality control in so many ways.
Do you think that, you mentioned your grandpa, he was a master distiller here. Mm-hmm. You're educated in whiskey. Did you know it growing up that was your goal? Like, we all get asked that question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Did somebody ask Chris Fletcher that and have you say, I want to be the master distiller at Jack Daniel someday?
No, it didn't. It didn't quite work that way. I was around the distillery with my granddad, but he retired when I was 8 years old. So, there was that time between I was 8 and I started working here part-time when I was 19. And so really for those, several years there, I didn't really come around the distillery much at all. I mean, I drove past it every day, going to school or whatever. And, but you don't really understand when you're 8 years old that your grandfather was the master distiller at Jack Daniels, you don't really know what a master distiller is. I mean, really, at 8 years old, you don't even really know what whiskey is, right? And so
I hope not.
Yeah, no,
I hope not.
I didn't. My time around here, I wanted to go play on the old fire trucks that are up there, and go down to the mill where you could catch some spent grain and try to feed it to the ducks down there in the pond or something. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to run around outside and play. My granddad would go inside. He'd have to get things going, I guess. There's a lot of times on Sunday afternoons that I could tag along with him, and he'd be working on something. And, I was in the still house. I can remember, everything just looked so big, as a young kid. Everything's tall, and the fermenters and the floors were just metal grates at the time, so you could see all the way down to the floor below you. And, I can remember that, and the smells and the heat. So it was one of those things that really, though, was time spent with my granddad, and being able to just be with him. And I can remember driving in, and we'd pull in his truck, and, the security guard, we wouldn't even stop, just kind of wave and just keep on going. And it was just one of those things that maybe you don't think much about it as a kid, but as you get older, you appreciate it a lot.
When did you first notice that you had an appreciation for whiskey, and more specifically this brand of Jack Daniels? Was it in high school? Was it when you're getting ready to graduate high school, somewhere in the 18, 20-year-old range?
Yeah, I think it was more so in college, because then, growing up here in Lynchburg, Lynchburg's proper population, 600 or so, something like that, county-wide, 6,000. So, almost everyone has a connection at the distillery when you're in high school. And it's, most people's families, you've got an aunt and uncle, a parent, a grandparent that's worked here. And so it wasn't until I went to college, and then you start, meeting people from, around the state, around the country, and they all know about Jack Daniels. And, oh, you're from Lynchburg, and they know about Jack. And so you start to then figure out what the brand is, and start to appreciate the fact that, like I said earlier, Jack's made friends all around the world. And so that's when I thought, wow, that's a really, great company. I mean, it's a really great brand. And then you start to dive into the details of whiskey from there. And I was studying chemistry, and so just kind of fortunately, a little bit hand in glove there. And of course, I had my granddad as far as a resource, as a whiskey maker, it couldn't have been anyone any better.
No doubt. Is it an acquired taste at this time in your life to where you're a fan of it? Do you start to appreciate a good whiskey, a good Tennessee whiskey? Do you, I don't know, I don't need to know how old you were when you first tasted whiskey, but do you have an appreciation for quality of, in the taste and the flavor of Jack Daniels at that time when you're studying chemistry and kind of start getting that mindset of maybe potentially working in the industry?
Not really at that time. So my first job here was as a tour guide. So I came home after my sophomore year of college. I was studying chemistry. Honestly, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I started in chemistry. I just enjoyed science. Chemistry was interesting. You really felt like when you're walking out of, chemistry lab, you had done something right with your hands, and something, it either worked or it didn't work. But at least, if it did work, you really felt like you learned something new that day. And, that's what kind of drew me into chemistry to start with. And then, kind of finding out from my granddad, who also studied chemistry, when he was going to school, and learn how much of the science is in the process. Because as a tour guide, you start to learn the process and kind of, what happens, corn, rye, barley, water, and how it flows through. And then, of course, with my granddad, it was kind of like you had the technical resource at home, too, behind that, to ask him all the little, geeky questions about what's really going on in the details of it. And so, I kind of had that, private tutor, so to speak, for learning the science behind the process and why they do it the way you do it. But I can remember, being around that age, around that college age, I didn't know whiskey, what was good whiskey, what was not good, or, and I can remember asking him one day, well, I know there's, really expensive whiskeys globally, right, that are made all over the world, and, really, hundreds of dollars a bottle and all this. And I said, well, but what's really the best then? What's the gold standard? What's the benchmark? And he just kind of stopped and he looked at me. And he said, Jack Daniels. Like, how dumb of a question was that? And I thought, oh, okay. Well, all right. So, it's kind of like shut up and listen and just keep learning about the process and why we do it the way we do it. And, I think that was really the part to where I thought, I've got to dive into this process and learn what's behind it. And, the more that I've done that, and now that I've been, 18 years removed from when I started kind of full-time with the company, here I am, and I've seen processes in a lot of distilleries all over the world. And really, I understand exactly where that came from. If you look at what we are capable of, what we do, and what our process entails, it really sets the standard. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean everybody's favorite whiskey is going to be Jack Daniels, right? I don't mean that. But I do mean I have never seen another process start to finish with, the quality of the grain, the quality of the water, the way that we are mashing naturally everything, the way we're souring everything naturally, very, very traditionally, the way we're culturing we're culturing a bacteria culture, a lactobacillus culture, and a yeast culture for our mashing process, or natural souring with the bacteria, and then fermenting then after that with the yeast, distilling that in 100% copper, charcoal mellowing, making our own charcoal up here by hand, making our own barrels, start to finish, our process. I mean, it is as bulletproof as I've ever seen in the industry. And so that's where you start to really appreciate what we do.
When you mentioned a couple minutes ago, Chris, about, there are bottles of whiskey out there that are more expensive than a bottle of Jack Daniels. There's whiskey out there that might be comparable in price, might be alongside Jack Daniels on a retailer shelf. A brand kind of runs the risk of, there's a mindset out there, and I've talked with other people in other sectors of brands. Let's take salsa, for example. I make the best salsa in the world. It's made in my kitchen with my garden vegetables, and everybody in my neighborhood loves it. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that Pace Picante sauce isn't good, because they had to be good at one time to have a lot of people go, wow, that's good sauce. We're going to go worldwide with this, or we're going to start regionally and then go nationally and then go worldwide. Like, the mindset's always that, my craft beer is better than Bud Light. Well, really? Because Bud Light's drinking by millions and millions of people. And if people educated themselves on the process of what they did, I'm sure they'd be like, wow, that really is a custom beer. Then with Jack Daniels, the biggest whiskey, 170 countries it's sold in. The label, the brand, the logo is world renowned. I mean, everybody knows what that logo is, the old number 7. You run the risk of somebody going, well, that's just a mass produced, they don't have any pride in that. And when you come here and you educate yourself, or just take the tour, come to Lynchburg and meet the people, one of the main goals of that part of this business with Jack Daniels is to educate people like, hey, this is like what you're saying. I mean, from the beginning to the end, from A to Z, this process is truly amazing. When the final product is what most people really, count their chickens on. Like, yeah, that's a bottle of Jack Daniels, but they really don't know what went into that bottle of Jack Daniels.
Yes. Most people are blown away. First of all, you think about it, it's single source. It's coming from Lynchburg. Every drop is distilled. Everything is made right here on site, as it's been since the 1800s. The people, the whiskey makers behind it, it's the families of Lynchburg. That's what I tell so many people. You want to talk about kind of the secret sauce. To me, it's the people of Lynchburg. There are, so many whiskey makers here that are just following, the torch that was lit by people before them, like my grandfather and so many other people that would have that same story. But yes, long story short, when you look at kind of how we do things, how we control things, we want to have our hands on every single ingredient, everything, every part of the process, anything that's going to affect the final flavor, color, and aroma of our whiskey. We want our own whiskey makers involved there, right? And controlling it. And so that's why we have a full-time microbiologist that's, right now in our lab, we have our, production yeast strain growing from the mother culture that we can trace the lineage of that actual strain of yeast back to Prohibition. Here when the distillery started back in 1938. We think it probably even goes back farther than that. We just don't have any way to prove it. There were no records left from before Prohibition. So, all of those things, insisting on copper stills, 10 feet of charcoal for mellowing, making our own charcoal by hand. We have our own folks up here at the rickyard. Their job is to take the hard maple, burn it down into black lump charcoal, right? It's not charred maple wood. This is hard coal. So this filtration process is a removal process. It's not adding color or flavor to the whiskey. It's actually softening and stripping things out, like the heavy corn notes, the oily, grainy character that whiskey gets right after it's distilled from the grains that it's made from. Insisting on doing all of those things the same way that they've been done for over 150 years. When people come and they see it, they're pretty blown away, and to think that we would still be doing it that way, and we are successful, right? And so we've got a brand that, what you're kind of saying, a bit of a double-edged sword. Because of the success we have, sometimes that creates some doubt or some cynicism within the market, and people would just assume that if there's a corner to be cut, right, not using a copper still anymore, using stainless steel, right, gonna save a lot of pennies, right? That's gonna save some money, but we don't feel like the quality and the consistency of the whiskey would be what it should be by making that change. And it's not to say that other folks that have made those decisions are doing anything bad. It's just not what we believe in doing here in Lynchburg. But you come here, you walk through our still house on our tour, and you see every single still lined up there, 100% copper, right? So little things like that, and it all adds up, to what goes into that bottle is Old Number 7.
Old Number 7, easily the most recognizable liquor. Budweiser's pretty recognizable. But Old Number 7 has got to be right there as far as, I think the guy that was Master Distiller before you, Mr. Jeff Arnett, told me that it's the most tattooed brand in the history of the world. That's saying a lot, right? I think the only way that they could probably get that number would be to maybe take a consensus from tattoo shops and tattoo artists across the world. Like, what's the brand that you've tattooed on people the most? And
right.
But your grandpa retires when you're 8 years old. I assume you're in your mid-30s right now?
I'm 39.
You're 39. So
soon to be 40. 31
years ago, would you guarantee that if we opened that bottle of Old Number 7, that it would taste the exact same as when your granddaddy had his signature on the bottle?
I think it would be pretty darn close. Exact same. That's hard no matter what you're trying to do. But it would be close. And we've done that. And Jeff and I, we had come across a bottle, and I've been gifted a couple of bottles as well from back there in the time when my granddad had made it. And it is amazing at how close, because even in the bottle, you're going to have a little bit of oxidation from the air that's in there. So the whiskey is going to, I call it just kind of calming down. It'll soften. Some people say it'll get smoother. I don't know that I would go that far. Maybe it gives you kind of the impression of a little more sweetness, just because I think the alcohol will kind of settle. It'll kind of calm. And I think what happens is, the cork, or even this, just the regular cap here with the seal, it's not going to be perfect forever. So you could get just a small amount of air getting in, and then so that is going to start to affect things, especially, after 30 years in a bottle. You're going to have a little shift, but I think it would be remarkable how similar they are.
Because the recipe is the exact same, right?
It is. So, but you think about the challenges that kind of we look at from the distillery side, though, is you're taking in each year, depending on, the corn crop, right, which is massive. We're 80% corn for Old Number 7. If you have a really, really bad, dry, summer, across, Tennessee, Kentucky, where we're, Alabama, where we're pulling kind of most of our corn from, you're going to have to make maybe some compensation for that in the process. So, there's so many things that we've done and seen and had to do over the years to keep the consistency of the product the same, right? When you're taking corn, rye, barley, water, right, and you're going to throw some yeast in there, right, to ferment it, and then you're going to distill it, and then you're going to throw it into an oak barrel, right? So then you got corn, rye, barley, water, oak. That's it, right? And you can count the yeast. So it's all natural process. You know, it's all agriculture basically at that point. And so, you know, naturally you're going to have ebbs and flows. I mean, even with the wood, with the oak wood and sourcing the logs coming through our stave mills and things and the consistency on that, you know, there's ebbs and flows on that and how the market moves. We're such a small part of the hardwood industry. I mean, we're not even like 0.5% of the American hardwood harvest. You know, people think about all the barrels that we have, and we do have a lot of barrels, but when you look at what, you know, that kind of North American hardwood harvest is, we are at the mercy of, you know, things, construction, you know, hardwood flooring, furniture making, all of those industries that are much larger. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that go into that, which again, when you have the advantage of having our own employees involved at each of those parts, you know, through that supply chain, that's where it really adds up to, yeah, we make the best daggum whiskey in the world here.
I couldn't agree more. What is a distiller and a distillery? What it would be an Oxford Dictionary definition of a distillery? Is it just where whiskey is made?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, a distiller, or what we call it, a master distiller. You know, to be fully transparent, when my granddad was working here, nobody called him master distiller. So, you know, that's really a term that's been, you know, kind of romanticized a little more over the last 20, 30 years. You know, head distiller, distillery manager, you know, a lot of other things I don't know that may have been used, but you know, master distiller today, honestly, is really a quality control position. That's the best way I can describe it. You know, I may be here talking with you for a couple of hours, or I may be tasting barrels, or you know, we may be working on planting a bunch of corn over here. You know, it literally every day is something different. As to where, when you look back at my granddad's time, I mean, it was all about you. We only did one thing, right? We made Old Number 7 every day. We made Old Number 7, and I could remember him saying, you know, it was like you had a recipe to bake a cake every day. You followed that recipe. You didn't deviate. Nothing was different. You tried to just recreate every single day. This is what we're going to do, guys. And so that's what they did. And thank goodness they were as good at it as they were, because we owe those fellows a lot.
So a distiller is quality control. A distillery is where they make whiskey. Mm-hmm. But you also brought up, again, Old Number 7. I don't know if there's a true meaning of why it's on there, but when I played baseball, I had number 7 on every jersey from Little League to college. It was my lucky number. Mm-hmm. I don't know anything else. I talked to Mr. Kevin, but Mr. Kevin deferred to you, which that guy's amazing, by the way. That guy is amazing, right? Like, truly a treasure there. But what's your stance on it, or your take on the Old Number 7?
Well, I can tell you my granddad's story, and I feel like, you know, he definitely has a better story than anything I could come up with. But you know, if you heard about the trains, that was my granddad's belief. I mean, he would tell you if he were here with us today. You know, so my granddad started working here in 1957, on January 2nd, 1957. He was hired by one of the Motlow brothers, and Mr. Reger Motlow, who offered him a job one day. My granddad was working in his father's grocery store down here in the square, which was then later the Lynchburg Grocery. So, you know, he grew up working in that store as a kid and knowing everyone, certainly the Motlow family, very well. And so he started working up here in the 50s for the Motlow family. And he said one day, I just asked Mr. Reger, Mr. Reger, you know, what is the deal with the number 7, right? And this would have been late 50s or early 60s. And he says that the story that he was told by the family was that back in Jack's day, first of all, Jack was very famous for not wanting to put whiskey in a bottle. He thought glass bottles were, you know, frivolous, you know, weren't needed. And everybody got a whole barrel. You know, if you owned a bar, a saloon somewhere, you ordered Jack Daniels, you got a whole barrel of Jack Daniels. And so there was a bar in Oklahoma that had placed an order for a barrel of his whiskey. So they had sent the barrel up to Nashville, put it on a train. It would go to Nashville to St. Louis. In St. Louis, it would have to change trains, right? They would have to unload it and then place it back on the number 7 train that went west from St. Louis to Oklahoma. something happened during the transition and it missed its connection. So the bartender is a little frustrated, and so he sends a letter or a note back to Jack saying, I've never gotten your barrel of whiskey. What's the deal? And Jack apologizes and says, I'm going to send you a second barrel for free. Okay, don't worry about it. This one's on me. So again, the second barrel goes to Nashville, gets on the train to St. Louis, has to then get on that number 7 train, right? Make that transfer on out to Oklahoma. So the railroad workers, if you think about a barrel of whiskey, they all look the same, right? Unless you read the fine print on the head that says, Jack Daniel Distillery, Lynchburg, Tennessee. And so those workers for the railroad, when they unloaded this barrel, the light bulb kind of went off in their head. Wait a second, we had a barrel just like this a few weeks ago. And they go digging around in their warehouse and they found it, right? And so now they have these 2 barrels, Jack Daniel's whiskey from Lynchburg, Tennessee. They're both marked with a big 7 because they have to get on that number 7 train. And so how do they make them different? Well, this one was the old one, and this one is the new one. I just wrote it right there on the barrel, and both barrels then go to the bar. And so a few weeks later, the bartender writes another letter back to Jack, says, I got your whiskey. In fact, I want to place an order for a 3rd barrel, but from now on, only send me old number 7 barrels because they're the best. It's better than the new number 7 barrel. So Jack said, hey, if that's the best, I'll make it all old number 7. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's Papa's story there.
And he heard that from a pretty good source.
Yeah, from Mr. Regger Motlow. Yeah, that would be a very good source. So,
and the Motlows were the family that Jack left the distillery to when Jack passed away, which was around 1911.
You got it. Yep.
1911.
1911.
From a story of coming into work early in the dark and trying to get into the safe, from what I've been told, and kicking the safe, developing gangrene and a broken toe, and sooner or later it got him with amputations and then taking his life.
That's right. Yeah, his official cause of death was blood poisoning.
Blood poisoning.
It was a couple of years after he had kicked that safe, but the story goes, he had come into work and was the first person there, and he was going to go ahead and open the safe, and we still have it right over there in the old office, and for whatever reason, it didn't open, and it is difficult, though. We can open it. We do have the combination, but it is very peculiar. You have to do it perfectly, or it will not engage and unlock. And so for, I guess, that reason, it didn't open for him that morning, and he got mad. He kicked it. It broke his toe, and he didn't seek any medical attention or anything for months. And the toe, it never quite healed. I guess there was an open wound to it. That wound became infected. And once he realized now that infection was starting to spread up into his foot, that's when he kind of got nervous and said, well, I need to go to the doctor. And, of course, he went through a series of amputations, but finally in 1911 is when he passed. He died in blood poisoning, was the official cause of death. Of course, 1911, the state of Tennessee had already entered Prohibition. We were actually a little ahead of the game there. We were in Prohibition a couple years before the rest of the federal government had declared it. And so he had deeded the distillery to 2 of his nephews because he didn't have any children of his own, Mr. Dick Daniel and then Mr. Lem Motlow, one of his sister's kids. And Mr. Daniel thought, well, whiskey's illegal. It's not profitable. They'll never make any money out of a distillery. So he sold his half to Mr. Motlow for $500, which was not a very good decision in retrospect, but who knew?
So then, truth be told, Jack Daniel, the name Daniel, hasn't really been on the distillery since Dick sold his shares to Marlowe and for $500, or has there been other family members with the last name Daniel that were there family members that were that generational that still worked in the distillery at all?
Not that I'm aware of with the name Daniel, and in fact, even the Motlows. There were 4 brothers and a sister of the Motlow family that were all Lem Motlow's children. Lem was the nephew that inherited it from Jack, and then he died in 1947. I believe it was 47. He passed away. And then, of course, he had his 4 sons and the daughter. Then would have inherited it. And it was really 2 of the brothers that were really hands-on with the distillery operationally. The other, siblings were involved a bit. Lynchburg's a pretty small place. Everybody's affected by the distillery. But they ran it until 1956, which is when they then sold it to the Brown family in Louisville, Kentucky. And we're still part of, the Brown-Forman Corporation today, based in Louisville.
Is there any story behind any potential name changing when Jack's passing it down? I mean, the Marlowe family could have very easily changed the name of it because it was such a young distillery.
Well, yeah.
And that name Jack Daniels could have been taken off of there in a hurry, right? With the Daniel family not even being a part of it anymore. Is there any like truth to that or rumor of that at all?
Well, for whatever reason, they had a lot of respect for their Uncle Jack and their Uncle Jack's process. And of course, they would have known Jack, certainly were in business with him. Lem Motlow was really kind of Jack's right-hand man and kind of the business keeper, right? The accountant, and kept the records and everything. He was never a distiller, per se. He had a brother whose name was Jess Motlow, who was really a whiskey maker, right? And so, I think that through all that Prohibition time, they did a lot of things. They tried to move whiskey around. They moved some whiskey down to Alabama and Birmingham. They moved some whiskey to St. Louis as well because, those states hadn't gone dry yet. And then, of course, finally, 1913, the federal government does away with it. Again, for the next 20 years, we go into federal prohibition. And so it eventually ran out on them. But when they started back, they did use the Motlow name for some whiskey. Now, they would sell it a very young, like a 1 or 2 year old whiskey, but they didn't feel like that had the quality for flavor and color. And obviously, it would have been a lot lighter because all of that color is coming from the wood of the barrel, and it just takes time to get there. So what you're seeing here is anywhere from 4 to 7 years old to get that kind of color on there. And so there was a Motlow Tennessee whiskey that we sold that was only like a 1 to 2 year old product. And then we also did actually quite a bit of corn whiskey. Back in the day, they did an old corn whiskey that was branded as Topaz corn whiskey in the 40s and 50s that they had done as well, keeping the Jack Daniel's logo off of it. And so it's interesting. It's an interesting point. Now, I don't think I've ever been asked that actually in my 18, 20 years with the company now. But it is a really interesting thing to sit back and to think about how they felt like maybe somewhat of an inferior product would carry their name. But once it hit the point to where they felt like, okay, now we can put Uncle Jack's name back on the bottle, it took a little more. So that's a really interesting point that you just made.
Yeah, I just was thinking, like, how could, just like the way that the human psyche works is kind of like, hey, it's people will never know. This has to have our name on it. But when you think about that name and how many times it's mentioned in a day, and I don't know if there's ever been a study done, but let's say pre-COVID, 170 countries, I believe is the number, something like 170 countries sell Jack Daniels. I didn't even know there was 170 countries in the world. I'm being honest. I really didn't know that. But the recognition of that name has to be something that when you come to work now, is there pressure on you? Like you seem like a really laid back, low key, well-spoken kind of guy, family man, just had your first baby, born and raised in Lynchburg, Tennessee, which is probably one of the most kicked back areas I've ever been to in the continental United States. I mean, it's more kicked back than a lot of places in Italy I've been in. That's pretty kicked back over there. But is there pressure on you right now, like to perform? Do you feel it like, man, I got to do it? Because you're a young man. Like, are you the youngest in history to have this? And I know that you say master distiller is just quality control, but still, it is easily one of the top positions in the entire industry of spirits, for sure, the Jack Daniel's master distiller. So first of all, congratulations, but are you feeling it? Are you psyching yourself out at all to perform, or is there some pressure?
I mean, I think what pressure is there is what drives you. I think it gets back to the pride of what we do. You talk about Lynchburg here and how, it's very laid back. It's a small town. we have a distillery. We got a lot of farms. We got a little town. We don't have any shopping malls. We don't have any super centers or anything like that. We've got one stoplight in the whole county. But we're really darn good at doing one thing, and that's making whiskey. And the thing about it is, as the master distiller and overseeing the quality and the production of our whiskey, that is my number one priority, right? Even though, I get to do fun stuff like, be here with you for a few minutes and talk about what we do. My number one priority is putting quality product whiskey in the bottle every day. And the thing is, we've got so many other great people that I know are out there right now. Even though we're not over in the still house right now, we got some great distillers that are over there right now making some great whiskey. And we got some great coopers down the road here in Trinity, Alabama, making great barrels for us, right, that are going to be coming up here in a trailer tomorrow morning, right? So that puts me at ease a lot. But the pressure is a good thing. And the great thing about it is with American whiskey now, so many people are wanting to try different things. We're growing our own corn here. We're experimenting with barrels and different types of barrels, and we're doing all these things that honestly, in my granddad's time, he would have never even been able to dream about it, right? Because they couldn't even keep up with Old Number 7. Old Number 7 was still on an allocation system, only sold in the U.S., only sold in one country until the mid-1980s. We finally started to export. We finally caught up, right? And so we went from the mid-80s, one country, to now 170. So you think about it, and people, they don't realize, if you walk into a bar in Chicago in 1978 and ordered a Jack Daniels, there's a good chance that person behind the bar is like, been trying to order a bottle or two for a month, and my sales guy, he says he might be able to get me some, next quarter, maybe, if there's enough to go around, because literally every single salesperson we have across the U.S. at that time was basically just an order taker, because we only had so much whiskey to sell. We could not keep up with demand until the mid-'80s. So, all of those things just kind of add up to where we're at now, and it's it's an amazing thing. It's amazing to look at the work that the generation prior to us did. My granddad, Mr. Jimmy Bedford. You mentioned Jeff Arnett, who I worked for years here. I've learned so much from as well. We don't take that lightly right now, and look at the work that they did. We want to keep pushing it and carrying it forward, and upholding the work that they did as best we can. You did ask me about kind of my age and being the youngest distiller. I'm not the youngest distiller. So my granddad, he was 38 years old when he became master distiller. So he beat me by a year.
By 1 year.
Yeah.
So that's almost 80 years of 80 years together. You guys were the master distiller, but you were both not even 40 yet before you turned master distiller. That just seems young to me. It's almost like being a 40-year-old baseball manager in the major leagues.
Right.
Right. And how many years did your grandpa, how many years was he the master distiller?
He was the distiller for about, till 1989, so 23 years. All in all, he was here about 32 years. Yeah, he was here about 9 years before he became distiller.
9 years.
And the last 23 years as master
Y'all
distiller.
got a lot of history together, because you've been here a good bit now too. Since you were 19?
Yeah, I started here when I was 19. That was part-time. I was still in college, and then started full-time with the company in 2003. But I actually moved to Louisville, Kentucky, to our company headquarters there, and worked as a chemist in our R&D lab. So I worked, heavily with Jack Daniels. Obviously, we are the largest brand within the company, and then also the Kentucky whiskeys, that we operate there out of Louisville. Also, was able to learn about Canadian whiskey production, and even worked on some projects in Mexico making tequila for a couple of years. And it was really, R&D was a great place to start my career, because you could touch any process at any given moment, right? And it was really, really interesting to learn about barrel making and tequila production, all these things that really rounded me out a lot more than what I think I would have gotten had I just kind of stayed this course the whole time.
You mentioned Trinity. The word cooperage is not something that most Americans have probably heard in their lifetime. I don't think I've heard it, but maybe 5 times, and I'm in my mid 40s, so like I don't hear that word a lot. I got to visit Trinity yesterday. I guarantee I would, or at least I would assume your grandpa's mind would be blown if he saw those robots in the technology in the barrel making process. The robot arm that takes the barrel lid, the barrel head, and dips it in the wax. And I mean, just amazing things that I learned yesterday, and the importance of that barrel, the Sinatra barrel, the different barrels, the woods that go into it, the rings, everything that is going into the barrel making process. And then the quality control of getting stamped to where there's no pressure leakage, no air leakage, no chance of whiskey leaking out of it. And how that barrel is made and born and then travels from at Trinity, Alabama up to Lynchburg, Tennessee to be filled with whiskey. That process and the confidence that you have in that, what is it that, is that one of the biggest reasons that Jack Daniel's sets itself apart, one of the biggest ways that it sets itself apart against other whiskeys out there?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you just, to boil it down, to distill it down, we'll say, if you think about the barrel itself, so all that color is natural, right? There's nothing added there. Maybe the single barrel would be a little better bottle to hold up. You can see the color a lot better. But there's no artificial coloring added there. It's all coming from the wood itself. That is dissolved barrel that's created that nice, rich amber color. And, of course, you're going to get a lot of the sweet caramel, vanilla flavors that are coming from that as well. So over half of the flavor of what goes into the bottle is barrel.
Half of the flavor.
Yeah, over half, I would say. Some people would say 70, 80%. Yeah, I don't know, but I'll tell you it's over half. And, the thing is about the barrel, when you think about that and you think about, what we do to control not only the construction of that barrel to make a barrel that is going to hold liquid, but also to make the barrel that's going to impart the right flavor and the right color to our whiskey over those years as it ages. There's a lot that goes into that, right? I mean, we're toasting the interior, right? Slowly heating that up to start to break down the tannins, the lignins, the hemicellulose, that's going to start to kind of pull those sugars to the surface of the wood, and they're going to give you that depth of flavor and depth of color that we want. And then after we toast the inside of that, we're going to char the inside of it, obviously, with the flame for about 25 seconds, which is going to destroy some of that toasted layer, right? Because the char itself is not going to add flavor, but the toasted layer that's then right behind the char is where that whiskey is going to soak in through the pores that have been charred and then absorb all that kind of rich sweetness that we got from the toast. And so, the way we do that is unlike any other barrel maker out there. We actually have a patent on how we toast our barrels, right? And so we truly believe in the impact and what that does to our whiskey, and that's why we do it the way we do it.
And tell me the process length or the barrels made yesterday. Mm-hmm. When will that barrel be done with its life cycle? And just with Jack Daniel's, because explain to the audience, Chris, that you guys don't reuse the barrel, even though it doesn't go to waste. It's used for a lot of different things after the fact. Yeah. But that barrel is not reused or filled with another Jack Daniel's whiskey, whether it's Old Number 7 or Single Barrel or Gentleman or whatever. Yep. How long does that barrel live from the time by the time it's put on that truck and leaves Trinity?
Well, the youngest possible would be about 4 years. So we don't, there's nothing that's going out less than 4 years. It could go up, way, way older than that. On an average, though, between 4 and 7.
4 and 7
years. It's typically, that's an average. I mean, we certainly have barrels much older than that, but most of the time, depending on where they're at and the flavor and the color we want to get out of it, between 4 and 7 years before we're going to dump that barrel. And then most of our barrels are going, over into Scotland and Ireland and different places to age other spirits and things like that.
So when that barrel lands in Lynchburg, and your team of distillers starts to, what's the word I use, fill it or pour the whiskey into it. What color is that liquid at that time?
Clear as water.
No way.
Clear as water. Yep.
Is it considered Everclear at that point, or what would that be considered at that point?
So, that would be a neutral spirit, right?
Neutral
spirit. That would be more like vodka.
Clear as water, though, for real, huh?
Yeah. So whiskey has no color. Any distillation process should remove any color, right? And so when you do that, you're left with different forms of alcohols. Obviously, ethanol is by far the biggest. That's beverage alcohol, right? But there's also other things in there, other types of alcohols that give flavor. There's acids in there, there's esters, there's aldehydes, all of these different natural organics that are made during the fermentation process that are, kind of not concentrated necessarily in distillation, but because of how we want to control our still and get a certain percentage of alcohol out when we distill it, that's going to kind of set our flavor of where we want our new make whiskey to be. Now, at that point, right off the still, most people think of it as moonshine. You mentioned like a neutral spirit. Well, this has a lot more flavor than a neutral spirit, right? And so a neutral spirit has to be distilled at 95% alcohol or higher. We can't even get anywhere near that on our stills because our stills are designed to make whiskey, right? So we're distilling to 70%, which is 140 proof, and it's that concentration of water and alcohol, right, and other natural organics that are in the whiskey that we want for consistent flavor. Okay. Now at this point, that new make whiskey will then be pumped over into holding tanks in charcoal mellowing, and it'll filter through that charcoal. So it takes a couple of days for the whiskey to slowly drip through 10 feet of charcoal. And the charcoal, of course, is black as the shirt that you're wearing. But after it comes out of that charcoal, a couple of days later, you pull a sample of it, it's still clear as water. That charcoal doesn't add anything to it. Okay, it's a filtration process. Now, our grain bill for the classic Jack Daniels is 80% corn, 12% malted barley, 8% rye. So that charcoal, what it's really doing is a lot of the corn oil that has a very distinct aroma and flavor, especially in bourbon whiskey. And I'm not saying anything bad here. I got a lot of great friends that make great bourbon whiskey. But there is a lot of times a considerable amount of corn flavor, cooked corn or sweet corn flavor in a lot of bourbons. But if you open a bottle of Jack Daniels, you really don't get much of that at all, which is unusual considering we're 80% corn. But the reason is that charcoal mellowing process. That's what it really kind of polishes. And corn oil can also be slightly bitter. And if you read kind of the history books on the aging of whiskey and the aging of American whiskey, it talks about the barrel kind of removing the bitter edge of the spirit, right? Well, we think that the charcoal does kind of a continuation of that. It's starting to remove that bitter edge. Then once it comes through that charcoal and we add it to that barrel, the barrel is able to just fully impart flavor into it, right? So that's kind of the process. That's where the whiskey's going to get the flavors on that very last part of the color and the flavor is the very last part, which is aging in that barrel.
Before I ask a flavor question, Chris, you mentioned proof in there. What is the equation for proof? You said 70% alcohol would be considered 140 proof?
That's correct.
So is it you just double?
Yep.
You double the percentage?
Yes, just double the percentage. That's right. And
double the percentage.
Yep, and so that is an old term, really pretty much only used in the U.S. When you go over to other parts of the world, they talk in ABV, alcohol by volume, so they want the percentage. But the story goes that maybe the old timers around here making whiskey in the hills and the hollers around here would be selling their whiskey clear, right off the still, or a barrel at that point was just a shipping container. So you didn't know necessarily if the whiskey was maybe a little watered down, right? Because it was clear. And so what they would do is maybe pour a little bit over some gunpowder and strike a match to it. And if it burnt quick, blue flame, that was proof that you were getting whiskey, not water. And so that's where the term proof started being used.
Wow, that's interesting. So it came from the mountains.
Yeah.
Flavor. How would you describe, if somebody said, what did that taste like? Nobody, you're sitting at a table with somebody and they've never tasted Jack Daniel's Sour Mash Tennessee whiskey. What did that taste like, Chris? It's hard to ask you that question because you kind of have the inside knowledge of it, but what does it taste like? Because it's so good. The way you explain it, it's really, it's not a huge list of ingredients. Pretty simple recipe, except for the execution of that. I get that.
Right.
But what does it taste like? And then on the backside of your answer, tell us what sour mash means, because I don't get sour out of Jack Daniels. I get a little bit of sweet, but I just get wholesome. I get like it delivers, right? It does what I want it to do every single time. It doesn't bite me. It's smooth. But I don't know if I could explain what it tastes like.
Well, I think you're already starting down the path, and your description so far is spot on. I would tell you that Jack Daniel's kind of classically sits in that sweet space, and it is smooth. It is not a whiskey that is going to, light you up, right? Never has been. I mean, we are a smooth sipping Tennessee whiskey. Always have been, and we always will be, at least with Old Number 7, right? And so, right away, when you talk about our recipe with 80% corn, that's going to swing us immediately kind of in that sweeter range of the bourbon whiskey world, let's say, right? So the more of, say, rye, a lot of people use rye as that flavoring grain, and we do too, but we only use 8%, right? There's some distilleries that would use at least double that, maybe at least triple that, which is going to affect the flavor of that new make spirit off of their still, right? And so rye, as you know, is a much heartier, spicier grain. So right there, right away, no matter what else they do, they're already developing more of a spicy, earthy, herbal type of flavor profile. So I would tell you, to kind of start back at the beginning of your question, if I'm describing Old Number 7 for somebody, it's certainly on the sweet range with a little bit of an oaky finish. Not overly spicy at all. In fact, I would say the spice only comes out at the very, very end. If you're sipping it neat, you'll just catch it right in the back of the throat. Just a touch of that rye spice will pop through. But it starts, to me, almost fruity on the nose. You get almost like an apple peel, a pear, or banana. Some people will even comment. Even walking through the distillery, I'll have people say, almost smells like apple juice. And really what drives that kind of fruity aroma and some of the flavor is the yeast. So the yeast, when it ferments and turns those natural sugars that are in the grains into alcohol, it's also making a lot of other compounds and flavors, right? And so it really has this unique ability to create this kind of fruity smell to our whiskey. And a lot of people don't notice it unless you really sit down and lightly nose it, because those compounds are called esters, and esters will boil and volatilize at room temperature, right? So immediately they start to evaporate out of your glass as soon as you pour it. But if you'll very lightly nose the whiskey, you'll pick up on that kind of fruity character. And then after that, you get the classic caramel vanilla that's coming from the wood of the barrel, right? The barrel really takes over after you get it past the tip of the tongue. You get caramel, vanilla, maybe a little bit of a brown sugar sweetness to it, and then it's going to finish with a little bit of dry oak and a little bit of spice on the back end. So kind of sweet to a little bit of an oaky finish is what.
When you say that spice part of it, what I get with meat is I get like when you're eating a salad or if you're eating a steak that you have black pepper on, and that piece of black pepper hits you right there where you get that pepper. I almost, I get like this, like a pepper, not a full pepper taste, but I get that pepper spice taste on the back end. And then I get what you said about that fruity up front, I think is dead on to it, but it's still hard to explain that, like what it tastes like, because it's just so unlike every other whiskey out there, and it way unlike any other bourbon out there, obviously with the process. But when you say spice, is the spice coming from the rye 100%? And what spice is rye going to emulate, or what is it going to put into that recipe?
To me, when I say spice, I lump a lot in there.
You lump a lot.
That's a good way. That's a good question to ask me. So I don't think about it. I talk about it so much. So spice for me in whiskey kind of is divided into two broad categories, kind of barrel spices and then kind of grain spices. And so that kind of black pepper, that peppercorn spice, that's the rye, right?
That's the rye.
So that's just that little bit of rye that will peak, and maybe not even every single time, but every now and again, as you swallow, especially with a single barrel or something like that, you'll come across individual barrels that just for whatever reason, as a single barrel, that spice seems to be elevated a little bit. That's just kind of the unique factor of a single barrel whiskey. But you do get that little bit of pepper, almost herbaceous, earthy peppercorn type of pop on the back of the tongue or even in the throat. Now, the barrel spices for me would come typically more on your older whiskeys that have spent more time in the barrel, or maybe whiskeys that have stayed at a really high point in a barrel house, maybe top floor or something like that, to really allow the oak to really start to work on the flavor of that whiskey a lot. And then that's where you're going to get, kind of dried, kind of bacon spices, almost like a like a cinnamon, baking cinnamon roll type of, aroma. And then, beyond that, when it goes farther, you kind of get into some sweet tobacco notes, almost like, pipe tobacco. And then you kind of get into the char of the barrel and even leathery, kind of at the very far end of that spectrum, to where something like our barrel proof single barrel that's come out and has just, developed this cult following, that people love to experience Jack Daniel whiskey straight out of the barrel, no water added, minimally even filtered, just straight into that bottle. It might be 137 proof or something. But that's where really you're getting the full impact of that barrel and what it's done to the whiskey.
The barrel proof, amazing. One drop on your tongue, kind of maturity process, another drop, open up the flavor and the taste buds and everything. I've been learning how to do that, and I enjoy it. What we're talking about with the taste, the sweetness, the fruity, the spice on the back end, there's songs like Jack Daniel's Kicked My Ass Again Last Night. It's the most sang about whiskey in the history of music, rock and roll. David Allan Coe, Eric Church, you name it, it's been written about, sung about. Why, though, Chris Fletcher? Why do they always associate Jack Daniels with one of those rowdy nights, or it kicked my butt again last night? Meaning that, is it so good that you can't stop at one and then it gets you? Or why, Chris? Is it like that all the time?
Well, first of all, I'll say, look, we always, remind everyone, all of our friends, to always enjoy our product responsibly.
For sure.
That's always first and foremost. So we want to remind our friends to do that. But our association with music, I think it's many things that kind of add up. You walk through our old office, literally where Jack's office was when he was still here making whiskey in the 1800s, and you're going to see musical instruments in there from when he funded his own band to come into town here in Lynchburg and play concerts for the locals, right, for the town. And so our connection goes all the way back to Jack himself. I mean, back in the late 1800s, he lived with his sister in a big house, had a grand piano in a huge ballroom on the second floor of their house where they would host parties and have bands come in and play live music. And so you think about, literally with our founder and the founding of our brand, our association with music had already begun. And then, of course, you throw us here in Middle Tennessee, which is pretty well known for the music industry. Our friends up in Nashville, you're only an hour away. So there's all kinds of, intertwining, I think, that just kind of goes along with it. Tennessee, we do music really well. We do whiskey really well, right? Maybe a few other things too, for sure. But those are probably the two most well known, bar none. How did it become kind of that go-to call, that go-to name in a song? I'm not 100% sure, but I could say, thinking back over my granddad's career when he started here in 1957 and listening to him my whole life, and thinking about how that was the time that Frank Sinatra adopted our brand, and then it was the Rolling Stones and so on and so on, and Eric Church today, as you mentioned. And I think there's an authenticity there with our brand, because it's not made anywhere else. It's all done right here in Lynchburg, all done the same way that it was done in 1957 when my granddad was here. I can promise you, I can look you in the eye, we make whiskey the same way my granddad made it. And we make more whiskey than he made in 1957, but we make it the same way. And we haven't gone out to seek those celebrity engagements, or we never paid Frank Sinatra a dime. He would
Wait a minute, for real?
Yeah. He would go out on stage, hold up a glass of Jack Daniels, call it the Nectar of the Gods.
Nectar of the Gods.
Yeah. And we always had some whiskey in his airplane. He and our first salesman, Mr. Angelo Lucchese, who was also an Italian American from Memphis, he made sure that Mr. Sinatra always had Jack Daniel's whiskey at anywhere he was going, anywhere he was traveling. He had a case of Jack on that plane and where he was going.
Nectar of the Gods.
Nectar of the Gods. And so it's that. When you see or hear that story, and I've even heard and seen recordings of Frank Jr. tell stories of Dad going out on stage, and he was not going to go out there unless there was a rocks glass, and it had to be a heavy, like, cut glass, like crystal rocks glass. Couldn't be a plastic cup. No, he had to be a heavy rocks glass. He had to have the 3 cubes
2-finger pour of Jack Daniels and a splash of water. And if he didn't have that, he was not going out there on that stage. And so, that's the thing, that when people are drawn to that, they know that that's not just a commercial where you've inserted, celebrity
endorsement
XYZ, right?
Yeah.
That just has a whole different feel to it. And, and in a lot of ways, Frank Sinatra was really the first rock star, almost literally. And then after that, it just kept snowballing into where it was, Rolling Stones.
Could you imagine how many businesses or entrepreneurs would die to have that free marketing? Like if every day Jack is being mentioned by Keith Richards or Frank Sinatra and Eric Church and Justin Moore. And I mean, I could literally name David Allan Coe wrote Jack Daniels, If You Please. He wrote Tennessee Whiskey. There are so many songs that have branded Jack Daniels, and Jack Daniels never had to pay for it. That shows you how influential and inspirational the brand was. And I don't think that somebody would just say it if they didn't mean it. They would not write it just because it rhymed, because a lot of the songs don't rhyme. When Eric sings about Jack, it's not just because it rhymes with back or another word. It's because the quality, the culture, the people, and what Jack Daniels stands for in the history of America and the history of the world. I just don't think that people could sugarcoat that or do it deliberately without having it in their soul and passion and love for the brand. I don't see that. I mean, I'm not saying that there's a songwriter out there that doesn't just throw Jack in there, but for somebody like Keith Richards or Frank to say what they say when they're on stage about it, I just don't see them doing that. And they're not being paid to do it. Most celebrity endorsements, from Shaq to LeBron to you name it, and Jeff Gordon, the NASCAR guys, to Ricky Bobby. I mean, he was so funny when he said, "If you don't chew Big Red, then you know what." So it's
right.
Like people they're not getting paid to say any of this.
Yeah,
that's crazy to me.
It is, but I think there's a thread of authenticity in that. If you did a Google image search of Jack Daniels and rock and roll, and I've never done this, I'm making it up, but you can only imagine then the pictures of these musicians over the decades, and absolutely the epitome of cool. Like, there will never not be a picture, if it's whoever, Jimmy Page or whoever it was, in those old pictures, that is classic cool and will never not be classic cool. And quite honestly, you couldn't pay for that, right? And I mean, and the fact that, he didn't care at the time, whoever that was, and it was just about, hey, this is great whiskey, this is what I drink backstage or on stage or whatever. So we have benefited, so much from that. There's no doubt about it. Have you ever
seen it happen with another brand? I mean, there's the Harley Davidson out there that you see Harley, and people get it tattooed and they wear the T-shirts and they're iconic. Mm-hmm. The Playboy Bunny at one time with Hugh Hefner, they say that was another one of the tattoos that was up there for brands. But have you ever personally seen a brand influence that rock god or that cool guy or that cool girl, that vibe, that image? I don't know if any other brand in the world has. I mean, I know there was Michael Jordan, and when you saw that slam dunk from the free throw line and heard, swish or you better eat your Wheaties and stuff like that, Michael Jordan was amazing, right? He was amazing. But this is a brand. This isn't Michael Jordan talking. This isn't Jack Daniels sitting up there going, "Drink my whiskey." This is a brand. Like, I don't know if there's ever been another one that has that, where so many people are wanting to express their feelings and passion and love for it. I don't know if there really are.
I don't know that there is either. I can tell you that, in my role here in the last 7 years or so, 8 years at the distillery, I've been able to travel all over the country, and I can tell you that I've seen in places where I couldn't really communicate with people with language. Young man behind the bar would roll up his sleeve, and there would be that old number 7 right there on his arm. And it's an amazing thing, and I get blown away, every time something like that happens, because people connect to our whiskey. They connect to our brand, whether it's through music, whether it's through just American pop culture, whatever it is in the history, and knowing that, every drop was made by some of the same family. We have family members that can trace their, ancestors that were here making whiskey with Jack Daniel. Literally, and they're still here making our whiskey today. And I think that's what it's all about. It's a real product from a real place made by real people.
When you start to think about your days as, working, you mentioned Mr. Jeff Arnett, who was the master distiller preceding you. Tell me about Lexi, how special she is, what this means to the industry, what this means to a 15-year-old, 18-year-old, 21-year-old woman out there. It hasn't been done before at this level. From what I've known, you might be able to educate me on that. But what does she bring to the table? Why does she earn that position? How did she earn that position? Why does she deserve to be put into that? For the first time in Jack Daniel's history, there's a female that's going to be your assistant. What is her title, first of all, Chris?
Assistant Distiller.
So she's right under you. So her and you are building the whiskeys that are going to be bottled by Jack Daniel's.
Absolutely. What
does she bring to the table?
Well, first of all, she's just a dang good whiskey maker. First and foremost, she has been in that distillery, and has learned the process from start to finish, from the ground up. And so to me, I think I've said the word authenticity a lot in this last hour, however long we've been talking. And with Lexi, she started working here about 8 years ago. She started as a temporary employee even in our R&D, or in our quality control lab, excuse me. And so, kind of learning, basic instrumentation, kind of basic, this is how we taste for quality and consistency, what we want. From there, she wanted to get her hands dirty. She wanted in the distillery. She wanted in there when it's July and, we've got cookers that are, cooking that mash at over 200 degrees and stills running at 200 degrees. And, hot, sweaty, dirty work. She said, bring it on. And that is what Lexi is bringing into this role. And so for the last 6 years, she's done a fantastic job as a distiller, as a Jack Daniel's whiskey maker, into where she worked herself into a lead within our distillery. She was basically a shift lead, overseeing the production of our whiskey day in and day out. We can produce over 100,000 gallons of whiskey a day. She was coming in, hands-on, supervising, had her thumb on the entire process. And so to have that kind of experience through the still house, she's earned her stripes. There's no question about that. And you can go over there and ask any of the other folks that are working in the distillery too, and they'll agree with me. I can promise you on that, because she knows that place inside and out. So really, it was an easy decision. When I was fortunate enough when Jeff resigned and I was given the opportunity to step into this role, Lexi was the very first person in my head that I wanted on, right here with me on the team, making sure that we're moving forward in the right ways. And so I couldn't be more excited. And, secondly, beyond all that, she's just an awesome person. I know you're going to talk to her later. She's a local girl, grew up working here in town, waiting tables down here at the old Iron Kettle restaurant on the corner, as a young person, and then, went to school, studied agriculture. She brings a wealth of knowledge as well when it comes to, the history of, raising corn here in this area and in Tennessee. We've kind of got our hands into a lot of different things, and to kind of looking, I'm a big proponent of looking at your past and what can you learn then as you look towards the future and innovation. And so she's going to be a key player in the innovation process as well. And as you know, we've got a lot of new things coming down the line from the distillery in the coming months and years. And so,
are you allowed to let any out of the bag?
Well, the big ones right now that we've got going are our single barrel special releases. And so I think we've still got a little bit of our latest rye single barrel proof. There's a handful of bottles, I think, left in our gift shop here at the distillery. So
I need to get one.
You need to head that way. Yeah, in fact, we better head that way sooner than later. I think they're literally down to like 20 bottles.
Really?
And they'll be gone. They'll be gone forever. So those our single barrel special releases. We did a couple of releases of what we call the Heritage Barrel, which is a really kind of heavy toast with a very light char onto that barrel to really bring the more toasty flavors, the sweet flavors out into the whiskey. That was named number 3 whiskey in the world by a couple of different publications, and really kind of got the eyeballs looking into our Jack Daniel's single barrel products, which to me is I love single barrel products because you get a little bit of variation. You kind of get to experience what we can as distillers if we go up to the barrel house and we're going to taste different barrels. With a single barrel expression, you're not mixing any two barrels together. right? So for old number 7, we're going to mix more like 200 barrels together. Because, right, we can't have any flavor variation with old number 7. With single barrel, you're going to get a little variation. You're going to have some that are a little sweeter, some that are a little spicier. It's just all about how that barrel aged. And so, the special release single barrels that we've been doing are to try to push the envelope a little farther with that heritage barrel, with the barrel proof rye that we've done. We're starting to work on what's going to be coming for the fall. We're not quite there yet, but we're working on it. One of the other lines that we're doing, though, is called the Tennessee Tasters, which is sold here mostly at the distillery as well, but it is available through the state of Tennessee. And that's truly our experimental line. We did a release last year. We brought in some wood from Jamaica. It's called pimento wood, otherwise known as Jamaican allspice wood. So here in Tennessee, when I saw pimento, I said, guys, I don't think we can put that on the label. If we put pimento on the label, they'll think we put cheese in the whiskey.
I was going to say cheese.
This is Tennessee.
Yeah.
But that wood, that type of wood, it really grows more like a shrub down in the islands, and it's what they use to smoke the chicken and do the jerk chicken. So it really has this interesting kind of clove, smoky, sweet spice that goes along with it. And so we toasted that in our ovens, and we broke it up into small pieces so where we busted the bungs out of about 50 barrels and inserted and then resealed those barrels and put them back away for, I think it was pretty close to a whole nother year that they sat with that allspice wood in it. And so it just macerated and picked up all those sweet, smoky, spicy flavors from that allspice wood. And, that's one of my most favorite things to do. Even though they're small, they're usually 30 to 50 barrels at a time. That's where we can really start pushing things and putting things out there that maybe start to push the limits. And then we can take that and learn from that and then see, well, could we do this as maybe a special single barrel down the road, or, maybe not. Maybe it didn't work out the way we want, but that's all kind of part of the experimentation, and not everything's going to be a home run.
So tomorrow you and I are going to take place in what we call a barrel selection. Single barrel. It's a program here to where you can come to Lynchburg, Tennessee. I actually did one last year with Jeff Arnett over Zoom where they bottled 3. You might have been a part of that, where they bottled 3 or 4 and sent them to me. Yep. And then I narrowed it down. It's a program that you offer to where somebody can come here, take place, and they will, narrow it down and then choose the barrel that they want, and then they will receive that entire barrel, all the bottles that come out of that barrel. They get that barrel head engraved with their name. Each barrel comes with a personal engraved tag around the neck, a medallion or whatever if you will, that hangs from the neck of the single barrel bottle. What can I expect tomorrow? Now that I've done one with Jeff Arnett, do you have an idea of what warehouse we're going to choose a few out of, which storage facility they're coming from? Have you given any thought of this yet? Or do you wake up tomorrow morning on a regular Wednesday and just wing it and say, oh, I pretty much know that guy is a duck hunter. I kind of have an idea of what he's going to like. I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to go here. How does it work?
Well, it's kind of a combination of the two. It's somewhere in the middle there. So we're going to have a pool of barrels that we know are going to hit single barrel quality. So I'm not going to just randomly, blindly go out and pull. First of all, to become a single barrel Jack Daniel's product, you're only looking about 1% of our total inventory that will ever qualify to be a single barrel whiskey. So that narrows our focus. So our single barrels only come from the top floor of the barrel house. Because we don't cycle houses here. We don't heat them up in the winter, and we don't cool them down in the summer. And so what you're going to get then is that natural heating and cooling, and that cycle on the top floor is going to be a lot more intense, right? So in the summer, it's well over 100 degrees up there. And that's going to really drive the whiskey to expand into the pores of the wood and pull more color and more flavor out of that, which is what you want, because with single barrel, you want that unique kind of thumbprint of each barrel flavor and aroma to be put on there. So we have already pre-selected barrels that we know are going to meet our quality control, what we want to say the box of single barrel that it's going to fit in. Now, some are going to be sweeter, spicier, oakier, whatever, and we'll make sure we'll go in and we'll have a nice little range between that 3 or 4 that we have, because I don't want I want people when they come in and they go through this process, even you've picked before, you know the flavor of Jack Daniel's whiskey, right? You're not going to need me to lead you through that and explain, okay, this is what this is. But I like to have that variation on the table because you never know when that light bulb might come off and say, that is really different. That is really unique. This is the one that speaks to me. That's the whole point of being able to do this. Not necessarily picking what you think your friends would want back home or whatever it would be. It'd be suddenly, you think I like whiskey on that sweeter side, but you come across this one spicy barrel that you can't get it out of your brain because you tried it, and that's where I want to go. And so that's what it will be. We're going to try to have 3 or 4 different flavor profiles for you to go through. And typically people are pretty amazed when they sit down and they taste them side by side like that. When they really start tasting and thinking about what it is and slowing down, they really start to tease out those unique flavors in each of the whiskeys.
And you'll taste with me?
Sure.
Jeff did, and I think that we nailed it. We both picked 67 was the last 2 digits in my barrel number.
Okay.
I remember it like it was yesterday. It was like one of the biggest thrills of my life to be able to do that with the Master Distiller. That's a really cool program.
It is.
And it's been, accepted in such a vast, you could be a homeowner, you could be a hotel owner, you could be an entrepreneur that might want to give away a bottle at Christmas to each of your biggest clients. It's an awesome program. You get personalized, like I said, with your name on them. There's even even services by Jack Daniel's in local liquor shops or, retail locations where you can go get them personally engraved and have a really cool gift to give to somebody or a thank you or whatever it is. So I'm excited for that. Speaking of Jeff Arnett again, back to my questions about Lexi with you. What was that phone call like from Jeff Arnett when he heard the news? Did he already know when he was departing that you were going to be his predecessor? How does it work out? Is that the right word, predecessor? You taking over for Jeff Arnett? Is that the wrong word or right word?
Successor,
predecessor?
Close enough.
Okay, something. But how does that go? He's got to be excited, right? Is he fired up and excited for you?
Yeah, Jeff is a great friend of mine, first and foremost. And I've known Jeff for 20 years. And, he started in with the company as a quality control manager when I was, in R&D as a chemist. And so, we overlapped on a lot of different things going on here at the distillery for many, many, many years. And then to be able to work for him directly for, over 6 years was amazing. He's a great friend, will continue to be a great friend. And, he was certainly very influential, with me coming back to Lynchburg. I was living up in Kentucky at the time. And so, I certainly owe a lot to Jeff, for sure. He was always an open book and an open door. I was very surprised when he decided to step away, and no, there was no, to answer your question directly, no, there was no direct plan that I would be the next master distiller here. I was just, fortunate, and I tried to work really, really hard and do a good job in my role as assistant master distiller, working for him. But we have a lot of great distillers here. We've already mentioned Lexi, but we really have, the best team of whiskey makers in the industry, and that's what makes Jack Daniel's what it is. That's what puts that liquid in that bottle, the consistency, the quality, day in and day out. It's the people. And so, no, I was not the only one considered, for sure, but I was the most fortunate at the end of the day. And so it's something that I don't take lightly, and something that, I plan to be here making whiskey for a long, long time.
So if it's Saturday afternoon at the Chris Fletcher residence, you have 2 bone-in ribeyes on your grill, what are you pairing with it out of a Jack Daniel's family of whiskeys?
Ooh, it's hard to go wrong with either of those. I'm a big fan of the single barrel. I really am, because to me, it's interesting sometimes to find, like I was saying earlier, you're going to get to taste 3 or 4 different samples, and you're going to find that one sometimes that speaks to you that really catches you by surprise. And that's the fun part of single barrel whiskey. So I like to, at the end of the day, as much as we control, those barrels and how they age, Mother Nature is eventually going to win, right? She's going to put her stamp on it that we cannot control, or else every single barrel would taste identical. And we know that doesn't ring true at all. You can have barrels side by side that were put in on the same day, have been sitting there for 10 years side by side, and they taste, remarkably different after 10 years. It's something else. And so, single barrel is always one I go to for cocktails and for mixing. The Old Number 7 is just, it's,
on the rocks single barrel you're going to have with the bone-in ribeye.
Yeah. Single barrel, 2 cubes.
So Friday night with the pool table, dartboards going, you're in your man cave with 6 of your college buddies. Is it Jack and Coke? What are you mixing with? What does the master distiller drink on a party night? If you have one. With a newborn, you're not going to have many of these for a while.
Honestly, just on the rocks again.
Really?
Yeah.
So is it against the? Is it a faux pas? Is it? What's the right word? Is it bad omen to mix Jack Daniels? Like Jack and Coke is like probably the most famous drink of all time. Even though if you look up the most popular drinks of all time, the margarita is number one. And I'm like, I just don't see it. I don't buy it. I mean, I know Mexican restaurants, you drink some margaritas, but it says I'm just not buying that. I would say for sure it's got to be the most recognized cocktail worldwide is the Jack and Coke. I'm probably a little bit presumptuous on that, maybe a little bit biased, but is it bad to mix Jack Daniels?
No, not at all. No, absolutely. Hey, if you're going to spend your money on it, you go out and your hard-earned, check. You spend your money on Jack Daniel's whiskey. You drink it however you like it. Again, the only wrong way to do it is not to do it responsibly. So that's what we'll always remind our friends. And Jack and Coke, there is something to that cocktail. There is no doubt about it. It mixes very, very well. I prefer my whiskey on the rocks. My grandfather taught me that. His theory was that if you ordered it like a Jack and water, that they wouldn't give you as good of a pour. You wouldn't get your money's worth. So if you order it just on the rocks and let the ice melt for a couple of minutes, that was his secret. In order to let them top off their shot there over the ice. So I guess I get that from my granddad, among other things. But honestly, in the summertime, fresh lemonade with some Jack Daniels. I mean, that's kind of our Lynchburg lemonade, our kind of whiskey sour twist kind of a cocktail is fantastic. This rye whiskey here, I would tell you, I mean, it is one of the most unique rye whiskeys on the market. It just has that really unique balance of spice and sweet. Pairs well with classic cocktails, old fashions, Manhattans, Sazeracs, any type of classic long whiskey cocktail. Our rye whiskey is just amazing for that.
I started drinking it like a year ago, and I'm hooked on it. The rye is truly incredible, and I want to do another podcast where we get into more of the science of the differences and what is going on, between get educated on what the difference between a whiskey, a Tennessee whiskey, a Canadian whiskey, a bourbon is, a Scotch whiskey, an Irish whiskey. There's a lot to choose from when you go into a liquor store, Chris Fletcher. There's a lot. It's overwhelming. And then you have the mindset of, well, I'm a collector and I want the cool labels, and it might not even drink that well. It might not pair that well, but it looks cool on my bar. I'm going to have a variation of it. There's nothing wrong with collecting. There's the mystique of Pappy's and the allocations of Pappy's and what drives what you see on the internet about some of those whiskeys. There's a lot of whiskeys out there. There's a lot of spirits out there being produced. It's a big market. Like I said, it can be overwhelming if you don't educate yourself or figure out what your taste really is or what your like really is. And I'm not saying that Jack Daniels is the only one out there, but to cut down on that feeling of overwhelmness, it's so consistent to go to it and say, the taste is there, the quality is there all the time. And the reason why is what we just discussed for the last hour and 20 minutes happens right here in Lynchburg, Tennessee. We haven't even gotten into the water source. We haven't gotten into what is sour mash and what the process is of the mash. I mean, I've been staying up here at Barbecue Hill and I drive by it and I'm like, it's like cereal. It's like oatmeal. It's like sweet. You don't want to like the smell, but the more you drive back and forth to my Airstream, I'm like, man, I love that smell. It's just, I want to get into all that, man. But what you've accomplished in such a short time is awesome. So congrats on that. It's very cool to see how humbled you are by it, but you're a very humble person. You give a lot of credit to your team. You understand that you can't do this on your own. This brand is way bigger than Chris Fletcher will ever be. You can never put yourself before the Old Number 7 or what Mr. Daniels did and with his family members. Mr. Daniel did, not Mr. Daniels. Mr. Daniel did. But it's truly incredible, man. Congratulations. And this place is, to be born and raised here and now living out your dream of a chemist to the master distiller at Jack Daniel's. What a cool ass career, bro. Congrats.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Any closing words?
Yeah, I just, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm so glad you guys are here in Lynchburg for a few days and having a good time and getting to experience. I know that we've been in the world of Zoom calls.
It's crazy.
And we're slowly getting out of that. I'm so excited to be able to get back out and about myself. So, welcome to Lynchburg. Welcome to my hometown. And on behalf of all our whiskey makers here, we hope you have a great visit. And then we're sure you're going to taste some great whiskey.
Thank you, my man.
Yeah,
Appreciate
take
you.
care. Absolutely.
That's Chris Fletcher, Master Distiller, Jack Daniel's, Lynchburg, Tennessee, the old number 7. So iconic. It's our title sponsor here at This Life Ain't For Everybody, and we couldn't be more proud to be part of the Jack Daniel's family. The culture, everything about this place is just on a different level. If you get the chance, visit Lynchburg. But like Chris talked about, what he reiterated, enjoy Jack Daniel's responsibly, never allow underage drinking. We are so proud that Jack Daniel's believes in what we're doing here at This Life Ain't For Everybody in the Foul Life. Thank you again for downloading and subscribing to the podcast. We'll be back at you with another episode soon. Tom, Jake, hit that button. This is Leith Lofton. What you going to do when the money's all gone?
We're all equal, that's what I think. I don't believe heaven has a bank. Make good use of your time.